The crystal stemware caught the light like ice, each champagne flute reflecting a dozen fractured versions of the room. Myra Scott stood just inside the private event hall of the Belvedere estate, a silver tray balanced in her hands, watching the shadows move between suited men who wore violence like cologne. "Stay near the walls," her supervisor had hissed in the kitchen, gripping her shoulder. "Don't look them in the eye. And if something happens, Myra, you run. These people don't leave witnesses." She'd nodded, professional, calm. But now, standing in a room where every conversation felt coded and every glance carried weight, the warning pressed against her chest like a hand. The Park family's spring gala. That's what the invitation called it. An exclusive celebration for allied business partners and family associates. But everyone who worked these events knew what the Park organization really was. The kind of empire that owned politicians, erased problems, and made people disappear into the foundation of new buildings. Myra adjusted her bow tie, her deep brown skin glowing under the warm pendant lights. She looked composed, a model of discipline. But her pulse betrayed her, hammering a warning rhythm against her throat. She wasn't supposed to be here. A last-minute call, triple pay for one night. No questions asked. That was enough. Her grandmother's hospice care didn't pay for itself. Medical school debt didn't forgive itself. And sometimes you swallowed your fear because survival came first. Just stay invisible. Serve the champagne. Go home. But fate is cruelest when you're trying hardest to hide. The room shifted. Music swelled, then stopped abruptly. Myra's head turned instinctively toward the commotion near the center of the hall. Jin Sung Park stood near the main table, surrounded by his inner circle. Mediterranean features, sharp jawline, a tailored black suit that cost more than her car. He was mid-conversation when his body went rigid. Then he collapsed. Not stumbled. Collapsed. The sound of his body hitting marble was obscured by the eruption of chaos, shouting in Korean, English, Italian, chairs scraping, women screaming, men drawing weapons Myra didn't know they'd been carrying. Everyone ran. Security rushed forward. Guests scattered toward exits. His lieutenants barked orders, forming a perimeter, phones out, guns drawn. And Myra stood frozen, her tray forgotten, staring at the man convulsing on the floor. "Run," her brain screamed. "This is not your problem." But her body moved before her mind could catch up. She dropped the tray. Crystal shattered. Champagne pooled like blood. Myra shoved past a bodyguard, her hands already reaching for Jin Sung Park's collar, fingers pressing against his neck. No pulse. Lips turning blue. Poisoning. Fast acting. "Get back," someone shouted in Korean. She ignored them. Her hands moved with the precision of half-forgotten training. 2 years of pre-med before she dropped out. Late nights in her grandmother's hospice room watching nurses work. She tilted his head, cleared his airway, and started compressions, her voice sharp and commanding in a way she never used. "Call an ambulance. Now. And get me anything with activated charcoal, baking soda, anything absorbent." A lieutenant stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Now." Someone thrust a glass of water and a pill bottle into her hands. Myra crushed the pills, mixed them, forced Jin's mouth open, and tilted his head to make him swallow. 30 seconds of compressions. His chest jerked. He coughed, violent and wet, and gasped for air. The room exhaled. Jin Sung Park's eyes opened, unfocused, dark, and locking directly onto hers. Myra pulled back, her hands shaking now, the adrenaline draining all at once. Around her, the remaining guests stared. Not at Jean. At her. An older white man in a black suit, the patriarch she recognized from photos, stepped forward, his expression cold and calculating. He said something in Italian to the man beside him. Then in English, quiet and deliberate. Who is she? A lieutenant answered. Catering staff. Myra Scott. The patriarch's eyes narrowed. Myra Scott just saved my associate's life. He turned to her, his voice soft, but the command in it absolute. You will come with us. Myra's voice cracked. I need to go. My shift is over, the patriarch finished. You've done more than serve champagne tonight, Miss Scott. Jin Sung Park was on his feet now, supported by two men, his face pale but his gaze sharp, lethal, aware. He stared at Myra like he was memorizing every detail of her face. Take her to the compound, he said, his voice hoarse but commanding. No one leaves until we know who did this. A different lieutenant leaned close to Jin, whispering urgently in Korean. Jin's expression shifted, surprise, suspicion, something darker. She knew what to do, the lieutenant said in English, clearly for her benefit. She knew exactly what to do. Who is she? Myra's throat tightened. I'm nobody. I used to study medicine. That's all. Jin's eyes narrowed. Nobody, he repeated slowly, does not perform emergency toxicology in the middle of an assassination attempt. The older patriarch stepped between them, his voice final. Take her. Keep her safe. If someone tried to kill Jean tonight, they'll want to silence anyone who saw. Myra's stomach dropped. I didn't see anything, she said quickly. I don't know anything. Jin's lieutenant moved behind her, not touching, but blocking her exit. Jin Sung Park stepped closer, his voice low, almost gentle, but laced with absolute authority. You saved my life, Miss Scott. That makes you either the most dangerous person in this room, or the only one I can trust. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. Until I know which, you're not going anywhere. Myra's breath caught. She expected them to escort her out. Call her a cab. Pay her for her silence. Instead, two men in black flanked her. The lieutenant gestured toward a side exit, and Jin Sung Park, still pale, still recovering from near death, watched her with an expression she couldn't read. Welcome to the family, Miss Scott, the patriarch said quietly. She didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But by morning, when she woke in a locked suite with armed guards outside her door, she would. Before we dive deeper into this story, take a moment to hit that like button if you love suspenseful, emotional stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next thrilling chapter. We also want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Whether it's your city, your country, or even just your favorite spot to watch these stories, we love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's get back to the story and see just how far courage can take someone when danger is closing in. Myra woke to silk. Not the scratchy polyester of her own sheets, but real silk, cool and impossibly smooth against her skin. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was still dreaming. Then the weight of the previous night crashed into her like a wave. The ballroom, the collapse, Jin Sung Park's unfocused eyes locking onto hers, the patriarch's quiet command. Welcome to the family, Miss Scott. She sat up too fast. The room spun. This wasn't a hotel. Hotels had emergency exit maps and privacy locks you controlled from the inside. This was something else entirely. The guest suite stretched around her like a museum exhibit, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, furniture that looked like it belonged in an Italian villa, art on the walls that might have been original. A crystal carafe of water sat on the nightstand beside her, next to her phone. Her phone. Myra grabbed it, her hands still trembling slightly. No signal. Not low signal. No signal at all, like the compound existed outside the normal world. She was still wearing her server uniform, minus her shoes. Someone had removed them. Someone had carried her here, put her in this bed, and left her phone just close enough to give her the illusion of control. The door was across the room, heavy wood with brass fixtures that gleamed like a threat. Myra stood, her bare feet sinking into carpet so plush it felt like walking on clouds. She crossed to the door and tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. She stepped back, her pulse kicking up again, and that's when she noticed them. Two shadows visible through the frosted glass panels on either side of the door. Broad-shouldered, unmoving, silent. Guards. Hello. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again louder. Hello? I need to leave. There's been a mistake. The shadows didn't move. Myra's chest tightened. She pressed her palm against the door, then knocked. Harder. I need to go home. My grandmother, she's sick. She needs me. Please. Still nothing. She was about to pound on the door again when she heard it, the mechanical click of a lock disengaging. Myra stepped back instinctively as the door opened. The man who entered wasn't one of the silent guards. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with sharp features and eyes that assessed her like she was a puzzle he was paid to solve. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored, and moved with the kind of controlled precision that came from years of violence. Miss Scott, he said, his accent placing him somewhere in Eastern Europe. I am Victor Kask. I manage security for Mr. Park. Myra's hands curled into fists at her sides. Where am I? The Park family compound. About 40 minutes outside the city. He stepped further into the room, and one of the silent guards closed the door behind him. Not all the way. Just enough to remind her that leaving wasn't an option. You've been asleep for 6 hours. 6 hours. Her grandmother's morning medication. The missed calls from the hospice facility. Her landlord, who was already threatening eviction. I need to go home, Myra said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Right now. Victor's expression didn't change. That's not possible. You can't keep me here. That's kidnapping. You're not being held against your will, Miss Scott. You're being protected. He said it like the distinction mattered, like calling it protection made it anything other than a cage. Protected from what? From the people who tried to kill Jin Sung Park last night. Victor moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. You witnessed an assassination attempt on one of the most powerful men in the city. You intervened. You saved his life. That makes you either a hero or a liability, depending on who's asking. Myra's stomach dropped. I'm not a liability. I don't know anything. I don't know who tried to kill him. I don't know why. You knew exactly what to do, Victor interrupted, turning to face her. Emergency toxicology. Activated charcoal. Airway management. You moved like someone with training, Miss Scott. Real training. I studied pre-med for 2 years. That's all. Then you dropped out. It wasn't a question. He'd already looked into her. Of course he had. Student loans you can't pay. A grandmother in hospice care. Part-time catering work for an agency that doesn't ask too many questions. Myra felt exposed, like he'd stripped away every layer of privacy she had left. What do you want from me? Victor crossed the room, stopping just close enough to make his point without invading her space. Mr. Park wants to know why you saved him. Because he was dying. That's not a reason. That's an instinct. His eyes narrowed. People with your background don't throw themselves into the middle of a mafia assassination attempt. They run. They pretend they didn't see anything. They protect themselves. Maybe I'm not like most people. No, Victor said quietly. You're not. And that's the problem. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Someone inside that ballroom tried to kill Jin Sung Park, Victor continued. Someone with access, someone trusted. Until we know who, Everyone who was there is a suspect, including you. Myra's breath caught. You think I think you appeared out of nowhere with medical knowledge you shouldn't have, and saved a man's life in a way that looked very convenient. Heroic, even. He tilted his head. Or, it could be exactly what it looked like. A desperate woman doing the right thing. Mr. Park will decide which. When he's ready. Myra's hands shook. She pressed them against her thighs to steady them. How long am I staying here? Victor moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. That depends entirely on you, Miss Scott. Cooperate, answer questions honestly, and this will be over soon. Lie or try to leave before Mr. Park releases you, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Myra stood alone in the beautiful prison, her pulse thundering in her ears, staring at the locked door and the shadows beyond it. She'd saved a man's life, and now she might never leave. Myra woke to silence, so heavy it felt like a threat. The suite was beautiful in the way expensive prisons always are. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. Silk sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A marble bathroom stocked with luxuries she'd only seen in magazines. But the door was locked from the outside, and when she tested the balcony, two men in black suits turned to watch her through the glass with expressions that said, "Try it." She'd slept in her server uniform, too afraid to change into the clothes that had been left folded on the chair. Like accepting them would mean accepting whatever this was. The knock came just after dawn. Not asking. Warning. The door opened before she could answer. A woman in her 50s entered, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. Mr. Park will see you in 20 minutes. There's a shower. Clean clothes in the closet. I suggest you don't keep him waiting. She left before Myra could ask any of the 1,000 questions burning in her throat. 20 minutes later, Myra found herself walking down a hallway that felt more like a museum than a home. Marble floors. Original artwork she recognized from her art history electives. And everywhere, the quiet presence of men who watched her pass with the stillness of predators. The lieutenant from last night, the one who'd whispered to Jean, appeared at her elbow without a sound. This way. He led her to a set of double doors, knocked once, and pushed them open without waiting for a response. Jean Sung Park sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood. The morning light cut across his face, emphasizing the sharp lines of his jaw, the exhaustion shadowing his eyes. He looked better than he had last night, but not by much. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. His usually immaculate hair was pushed back carelessly. And when he looked up at her, his gaze was so direct it felt like a physical touch. Miss Scott, sit. It wasn't a request. Myra sat in the leather chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. The lieutenant closed the doors and took a position against the wall, arms crossed, watching her like she might pull a weapon from thin air. Jean studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back in his chair, the movement careful, like his body still hurt. You saved my life, he said quietly. That's not a small thing in my world. Myra's throat was dry. I'm glad you're okay, but I'd really like to go home now. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. Would you? I won't tell anyone what happened. I don't even know what happened. You just performed emergency toxicology in the middle of an assassination attempt, Jean interrupted, his voice still soft but edged with something sharp. You identified the poison. You knew the countermeasures. You moved like someone who's done this before. I haven't, Myra said quickly. I studied pre-med for 2 years before I dropped out. I worked in a hospice. I reacted. Jin's eyes narrowed slightly. You reacted perfectly. The silence stretched between them, taut and dangerous. Who are you, Miss Scott? I told you. I'm nobody. Nobody, Jin repeated, his tone turning cold. Doesn't move like you moved. Nobody doesn't stay calm under pressure like that. Nobody doesn't save my life when everyone else ran. Myra's pulse hammered in her throat. I'm a server who used to want to be a doctor. That's it. I'm not. I'm not whatever you think I am. Jin watched her for another long moment. Then he reached for a glass of water on his desk, his hand steady despite the pallor still clinging to his skin. He took a slow sip, his gaze never leaving hers. Last night, someone tried to kill me, he said finally. Someone close enough to poison my drink at my own table. Someone who knew exactly where I'd be, what I'd drink, and when I'd be most vulnerable. Myra's stomach tightened. That means, Jean continued, I have a traitor in my organization. Someone I trust. Someone who sits at my table and smiles while planning my death. He set the glass down with deliberate care. It also means there's a rival faction bold enough to try this. The Marchetti family, out of New York, most likely. They've been testing boundaries for months. Last night was their opening move. Myra's voice came out smaller than she intended. Why are you telling me this? Jin's expression didn't change. Because you're the only person in that room I can trust. The words landed like stones. What? You had no reason to save me, Jin said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze intense. No motive. No stake in my survival. You were just a server trying to get through the night. And when everyone else ran, you stayed. You risked your life for mine without hesitation. He paused, his voice dropping lower. Do you know what that means to me? In a world where loyalty is bought and sold, where everyone around me wants something, you gave me my life back and asked for nothing. Myra's breath caught. I want to go home. You can't. The finality in his voice made her chest tighten. Why not? Jin's expression hardened. Because whoever tried to kill me saw you save me. They saw you on your knees, working to undo what they'd done. And now they know you're a witness. A loose end. Do you understand what that makes you? Myra's hands clenched in her lap. It makes you a target, Jean said softly. The moment you walk out of this compound, you're dead. The room felt smaller suddenly. The walls closer. So what? Myra's voice shook. You're just going to keep me here? A prisoner? Jin's jaw tightened. I'm going to keep you alive. By locking me up? By keeping you close. The words hung between them, loaded with implications Myra didn't want to examine. Jean stood slowly, moving around the desk with the careful grace of someone still recovering. He stopped a few feet from her chair, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I don't trust my bodyguards right now, he said quietly. I don't trust my advisors. I don't trust anyone who was in that room last night. But I trust you, Miss Scott. Because you had every reason to let me die, and you didn't. His gaze held hers, dark and unreadable. So you're going to stay here, in this house, under my protection. And you're going to help me find out who tried to kill me. Myra's throat closed. I don't know anything about. You're observant, Jean interrupted. You're smart. You stay calm under pressure. And you're invisible to them. They'll talk around you. Let things slip. You'll see what I can't. He took another step closer. I'm not asking, Miss Scott. This is the only way you survive. The only way I survive. So you can hate me for it if you want. But you're staying. Myra stared up at him, her heart pounding, her mind racing through impossible options. And if I refuse? Jin's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something almost like regret. Then I'll have my men lock your door from the outside and post guards at your window. And you'll stay anyway. The only difference is whether you're helping me or hating me." The silence stretched. Finally, Myra forced the words out. "You're not giving me a choice." "No," Jean said quietly. "I'm not. Because I owe you my life, Miss Scott. And I intend to repay that debt by making sure you get to keep yours." He turned and walked back to his desk, the conversation over. "Someone will bring you breakfast. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start looking for the traitor." Myra stood on shaking legs, the lieutenant already opening the door. As she stepped into the hallway, Jin's voice followed her. "Thank you for saving me." She didn't turn around, but she heard the weight in those words, the sincerity, and somehow that made everything worse. Myra had been in the park compound for 3 days when she met the brother. She'd heard him before she saw him, a voice that carried through the marble hallways like a whip crack, sharp and irritated, speaking rapid Korean that needed no translation. Someone was angry. Someone was coming. She stood near the window of what Jean called the private library, though it looked more like a war room with books. Jean was at his desk, reviewing security footage on 3 monitors, his expression unreadable. He'd barely acknowledged her presence since she'd been escorted in 20 minutes earlier, told only to wait. The door didn't open. It slammed. A man strode in, and Myra's first thought was that he looked like Jin's shadow cast in a different light. Same height, same build, but where Jean carried his power like a blade sheathed and ready, this man wore his like a weapon already drawn. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and his hair was styled with the kind of precision that suggested control was everything. His eyes landed on her immediately, and the temperature in the room dropped. "This is her," he said in English, the words clipped dismissive. Jean didn't look up from the screens. "Myra Scott, the woman who saved my life." The brother's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. He moved closer, circling her the way someone might assess a stray dog that had wandered into a mansion. Myra forced herself to stand still, to meet his gaze even as her instincts screamed to look away. "Sung Park," Jean said, finally glancing up. "My younger brother, head of our Eastern operations." Sung stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, cold, something that probably cost more than her rent. "You're the server." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I was," Myra said carefully. "And now you're what? A guest?" His laugh was sharp, humorless. "Do you have any idea what kind of position you've put us in?" Myra opened her mouth, but Jin's voice cut through first, calm and even. "She put me in a position where I'm still breathing. That's the only position that matters." Sung turned to his brother, and the tension between them was immediate, thick enough to choke on. "You've kept a civilian here for 3 days. A witness. Someone who knows nothing about our world, our rules, our enemies. And you think that's acceptable?" "I think," Jean said, standing slowly, "that she acted when my own security didn't. I think she's the reason I'm standing here having this conversation instead of lying in a morgue. And I think that earns her protection, not suspicion." "Protection?" Sung's voice rose, the control slipping just enough to show the fury beneath. "She's a liability, Jean. Every second she's here, she's learning more about us. Our structure. Our vulnerabilities. What happens when she walks out of here? What happens when someone with less honor decides to make her talk?" Myra's chest tightened. She'd been thinking the same thing for 3 days, lying awake in that too-soft bed, wondering when they'd decide she knew too much. But hearing it said out loud, hearing the cold calculation in Sung's voice, made it real in a way that twisted her stomach. "She's not walking out," Jean said quietly. The room went still. Sung stared at his brother. What did you just say? You heard me. Jin's voice was soft, but absolute. She stays under my protection until we find who tried to kill me. And then what? Sung stepped forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You think she'll just keep your secrets out of gratitude? You think she won't sell every piece of information she's collected the moment she needs money? You're being reckless, and recklessness gets people killed. Careful, Sung. Jin's tone shifted, colder now, the kind of cold that reminded Myra exactly who he was. You're questioning my judgment. I'm questioning your survival instinct, Sung shot back. Father built this organization on rules, on discipline, on knowing exactly who belongs and who doesn't. She doesn't belong here, Jean, and keeping her puts all of us at risk. Myra found her voice, small but steady. I'm not asking to be here. Both men turned to her, and she forced herself to continue, even as her pulse hammered. I didn't ask for any of this. I just did what anyone with a conscience would do. I saved a life. That's all. Sung's expression was scathing. That's all? You think saving his life gives you some kind of claim? Some kind of protection? This isn't a fairy tale, Miss Scott. This is an organization built on blood and loyalty. You have neither. She has mine. Jin's words landed like a gavel. Sung's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with something between fury and disbelief. You're making a mistake, Sung said, his voice low, controlled again, but the threat in it unmistakable. And mistakes in this family have consequences. He turned to Myra, his expression cold, final. I don't know what you think this is, or what you hope to gain, but understand this. I will be watching you. Every move, every word. And the moment you prove to be the threat I know you are, your usefulness will end. Permanently. The promise hung in the air, sharp and lethal. Sung turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a controlled click that was somehow worse than a slam. Myra exhaled, her hands trembling. She pressed them against her sides, hoping Jean wouldn't notice. He noticed. He's protective, Jean said, his voice almost apologetic. Almost. Of the family. Of our legacy. He sees threats everywhere. Am I? Myra asked quietly. A threat? Jean looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. I don't know yet, he said honestly. But if you were, you wouldn't have saved my life when you could have just walked away. Your brother doesn't see it that way. My brother, Jean said slowly, doesn't trust easily. And right now, neither do I. But I'm giving you a chance to prove him wrong. Myra met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. And what happens if I can't? Jean didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. The suite they gave her had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate gardens, Italian marble in the bathroom, and a closet full of clothes that fit her perfectly. Silk robes, cashmere sweaters, designer jeans with the tags still on. Someone had measured her, catalogued her, prepared for her captivity like she was an expected guest. Myra stood at the window, watching the morning light catch on the fountain below, and tried the handle for the fourth time that week. Still locked. The door opened only when they wanted it to. Breakfast arrived on a silver card at 8. Lunch at noon. Dinner at 7. Always the same young woman in a crisp uniform, always with the same polite smile that never reached her eyes, always flanked by a silent guard who watched Myra like she might bolt. Is there anything else you need, Miss Scott? The woman asked in accented English. Myra smiled back, just as hollow. My freedom would be nice. The woman's expression didn't change. She simply nodded and left, the lock clicking behind her with a finality that made Myra's chest tighten. 3 weeks. She'd been here 3 weeks. Jin Sung Park had visited twice. The first time to thank her formally, his voice still rough from the poison, his eyes unreadable. The second time to inform her that the investigation was ongoing, that her safety was his priority, that patience was a virtue. She'd wanted to throw something at him. Instead, she'd nodded, composed, professional, the way her grandmother taught her to be when powerful people were watching. But patience was running thin. Myra had started noticing things. Small things. The kind of discrepancies you only saw when you had nothing to do but observe. The guard outside her door changed every 6 hours, but one face kept returning. A tall man with a scar through his left eyebrow who always checked his phone too often, his shoulders tense in a way the others weren't. The kitchen staff rotated except for one older woman who brought her tea personally every afternoon, her hands shaking slightly when she set down the tray. And then there was the security sweep that happened every night at 11. Footsteps in the hall, low voices in Korean, the sound of doors opening and closing in a rhythm that felt like searching. They were looking for something. Or someone. And they didn't trust their own people. The realization settled over Myra like cold water. Jin wasn't just keeping her here because she was a witness. He was keeping her here because she was the only person in this entire compound he knew wasn't part of whatever conspiracy had nearly killed him. The thought should have been flattering. Instead, it was terrifying. On the 24th day, everything changed. Jean came to her suite just after breakfast, alone, which was the first unusual thing. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, but there were shadows under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "Miss Scott," he said, his voice formal but edged with something she couldn't name. "I need your help." Myra set down her coffee, her heart picking up speed. With what? He stepped inside, and for the first time since she'd been here, he closed the door behind him without a guard present. The lock didn't click. "You're observant," Jean said, moving to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "You notice things other people miss. It's why you saved my life. You saw what everyone else was too panicked to see." "I reacted," Myra said carefully. "That's all."
"No."
He turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You assessed, prioritized, acted. In less than 30 seconds, you identified poisoning, improvised treatment, and commanded a room full of armed men." He paused. "I've been watching you. You've been watching my staff." Myra's pulse spiked. She hadn't been subtle enough. "I'm not spying," she said quickly. "I'm just bored," Jean finished, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And intelligent. And trapped." He moved closer, stopping just at the edge of her personal space. "I'm going to offer you a choice, Miss Scott. You can stay here, comfortable and safe and utterly useless. Or you can help me find the person who wants me dead. I'm not a detective. You're better." His voice dropped, intimate, dangerous. "You're invisible. You're someone no one in my organization would suspect. And right now, I trust you more than I trust my own blood." The weight of that statement hung between them. Myra should have said no. Should have demanded her release, threatened lawyers, made a scene. But something in Jin's expression, the exhaustion, the barely concealed desperation, stopped her. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. Jean pulled a keycard from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "This gives you access to my office, my files, my security feeds. Everything I have." He met her eyes. "I need you to find the discrepancy. The one thing that doesn't fit. The person who's been feeding information to my enemies." "Why me?" "Because everyone else has something to gain from my death." His jaw tightened. "You're the only person in this compound who's here against your will. That makes you the only person I can believe." Myra picked up the keycard, the plastic worm from his pocket. And if I find something, then you tell me. Jin's voice went cold, final. And I handle it. She didn't ask what handle it meant. She didn't need to. If I do this, Myra said slowly, I want something in return. Jin's eyebrow arched. You're negotiating with me? You're asking me to risk my life. She held his gaze. Again. So yes, I'm negotiating. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, incredibly, he smiled. A real smile, sharp and genuinely amused. Name your price, Miss Scott. When this is over, Myra said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart, I walk out of here. No conditions. No debt. No golden cage. Jin's smile faded, replaced by something more complex. He extended his hand. Deal. Myra shook it, his grip firm and warm, and tried to ignore the fact that she'd just made a bargain with a man who could make her disappear with a single word. As he moved toward the door, Jean paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Welcome to the inner sanctum, Miss Scott, he said quietly. Try not to find anything you can't unsee. Then he was gone, and Myra was left standing in her gilded prison, holding the key to his entire empire, wondering what the hell she'd just agreed to. The dress arrived at dawn, delivered by a woman who didn't speak and didn't meet Myra's eyes. Midnight blue silk that felt like water against her fingers, tailored so precisely it could only have been made for her measurements. No note, no explanation, just the dress and the unspoken command it carried. Myra stared at it draped across the chair in her gilded prison, her stomach tight with understanding. Jean's son Park didn't do anything without purpose. And a dress like this wasn't for a quiet breakfast. The knock came an hour later. Not Jin's lieutenant this time, but Jean himself, standing in her doorway in a charcoal suit that made him look like he'd been carved from stone. His beard was trimmed sharp, his dark eyes steady and unreadable. You look like you're about to execute someone, Myra said, trying to keep her voice light. His mouth didn't smile, but something shifted in his expression. Get dressed. We have a meeting. We. She crossed her arms. I don't take meetings. I'm a hostage, remember? You stopped being a hostage 3 days ago. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Now you're something far more dangerous. What's that supposed to mean? Jean moved to the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him like a man used to carrying weight no one else could see. The family elders have requested an audience. They want to see the woman who saved my life. Myra's pulse kicked. Then tell them I'm unavailable. That's not how this works. He turned, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something close to weariness in his face. My brother has been whispering poison in their ears. Calling you a liability. A risk. Someone I'm keeping close out of sentiment rather than strategy. He's not wrong. He is. Jin's voice dropped, quiet but absolute. You've noticed things my own men missed. You've asked questions that exposed gaps in our security. You think like someone who doesn't belong here, and that makes you invaluable. Myra swallowed. Or, it makes me a target. It makes you both. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the one she'd noticed where he was unconscious on the marble floor. Which is why tonight you're going to stand beside me in front of every allied family, every elder who holds a vote in this organization, and they're going to see exactly what you are. What am I? His dark eyes held hers. Mine. The word hung between them, heavy and possessive and terrifying. I'm not yours, Myra said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. Jin's expression didn't change. Tell yourself that if it helps. But when we walk into that room tonight, everyone else will believe it. And belief, Miss Scott, is the only currency that matters in my world. The meeting was held in the Park family's private estate, a sprawling compound that looked like a fortress disguised as a villa. Myra's heels clicked against marble as Jean guided her through hallways lined with art that probably cost more than her entire college tuition. His hand rested at the small of her back, a touch that looked protective but felt like a brand. The double doors opened to a room that stole her breath. A massive oval table dominated the space, surrounded by men and a few women who radiated power like heat. Older faces, hard faces, faces that had seen violence and ordered more. She recognized some from photographs Jean had shown her, allies and enemies sitting shoulder to shoulder in the complex web of organized crime. And at the far end of the table, Sung Park, Jin's brother, watched her with cold calculation. Every head turned as they entered. Jean didn't pause. He walked her to the head of the table, pulled out the chair directly beside his own, and waited until she sat before taking his place. The message was unmistakable. She wasn't a guest. She was an equal. "Gentlemen," Jean said in English, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. "You've all heard the rumors. Tonight, I'm providing clarity." An older man with silver hair and a scar bisecting his eyebrow leaned forward. "We've heard you're keeping a civilian, an outsider. We've come to understand why." "Her name is Myra Scott." Jin's hand moved to rest on the table near hers, not touching, but close enough to feel deliberate. "She saved my life when my own security failed. She saw what others missed. And she's proven herself indispensable to our continued operations." Sung Park's laugh was soft, mocking. "Indispensable. That's a generous word for a liability who knows too much." Jin's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Myra heard her own voice cutting through the tension. "I know enough to understand that whoever poisoned your brother is still in this organization." She met Sung's gaze directly. "And I know enough to recognize desperation when I see it." The room went silent. Sung's expression darkened. "Careful, Miss Scott. You're speaking to people who've buried smarter women than you." "Then maybe," Myra said, her heart hammering but her voice steady, "you should be asking yourselves why your brother trusts someone with 2 years of pre-med over men who've served this family for decades." Jin's hand shifted, his fingers brushing hers beneath the table. A warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell. The silver-haired elder studied her with new interest. "She has a spine. I'll give her that." "She is more than that," Jean said quietly. "She has something none of you can offer me right now. An outside perspective uncorrupted by loyalty or ambition." Another elder, a woman with sharp cheekbones and colder eyes than Jin's, spoke in accented English. "And when she becomes corrupted, when she learns too much and becomes a threat." Jin's voice dropped to something lethal. "Then she'll have earned her place at this table permanently." Myra's breath caught. That wasn't protection. That was a trap disguised as elevation. The meeting continued, discussions of territory and alliances and coded references to violence Myra only half understood. But she felt the shift in the room, the way eyes kept returning to her, assessing, calculating, wondering. When it finally ended, Jin's hand found hers as they stood, his grip firm and possessive. Sung Park blocked their path to the door, his smile thin and dangerous. "Enjoy your new pet, brother. Just remember what happens to things you keep too close." Jin's expression didn't change. "I remember what happens to men who threaten what's mine." They were in the car before Myra could breathe again, the leather seats cool against her back, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. "You made me a target," she said, her voice shaking despite her effort to control it. Jean stared straight ahead. "I made you untouchable. Those aren't the same thing. In my world, they are." He turned to her then, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her chest tight. You stood in that room and called out my brother in front of the most dangerous people in this city. Do you understand what that means? That I'm insane?" His mouth curved, almost a smile. "That you're exactly who I thought you were." Myra looked away, her pulse still racing, the weight of every stare from that room pressing against her skin. "What happens now?" Jin's hand found hers in the darkness between them, his fingers threading through hers with a certainty that felt like a vow. "Now," he said quietly, "we find out who wants me dead before they realize you're the only reason I'm still alive." The car pulled through the compound gates, and Myra understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't a hostage anymore. She was something far more dangerous. His. Myra found it in the security logs at 3 in the morning, her eyes burning from the blue light of Jin's private office monitors. She'd been staring at personnel records for hours, cross-referencing movement patterns against the timeline of the gala. Jin had given her access to everything, a gesture that felt equal parts trust and test. The files were meticulous, obsessive even. Every guard rotation, every delivery, every person who entered the Belvedere estate that night had been cataloged, time-stamped, recorded. But it was the pattern she noticed first. The absence where there should have been presence. Some Park's head of security, a man named Chun, had logged out of the East Wing surveillance room at exactly 9:47 p.m. The assassination attempt happened at 10:03. Chun didn't log back in until 10:24, 21 minutes of dead air during the most critical window of the night. Myra leaned back in the leather chair, her mind racing. 21 minutes. Long enough to disable cameras, redirect guards, ensure the poison made it to Jin's glass undetected. She pulled up Chen's communication records. 3 calls to an unlisted number in the hour before the gala. The same unlisted number that appeared in the phone records of the compromised caterer who delivered the champagne. Her stomach tightened. Chen reported directly to Sung Park. Had for 5 years. Loyalty bought and maintained through blood and money. The kind of loyalty that didn't break unless someone offered something better. Or unless the loyalty had never been real to begin with. Myra's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could feel the weight of what she was about to do, the line she was about to cross. Accusing Sung Park's man was one thing. Accusing Sung Park himself was something else entirely. But the evidence didn't lie. She pulled up the financial records Jean had unlocked for her, the ones he'd said would help her understand the family's structure. Sung Park had been funneling money into a shell company for the past 8 months, small transfers that alone meant nothing but, together, painted a picture. The same shell company had made a payment to Chin 3 days before the gala. $50,000, listed as consulting fees. Myra's breath caught. She opened another file, this one from Jin's personal notes. A list of recent conflicts within the organization, disputes over territory, disagreements about the direction of the family business. Sung Park's name appeared again and again, arguing for more aggressive expansion, pushing back against Jin's measured approach, his desire to legitimize their operations. The door to the office opened without warning. Myra spun in the chair, her heart lurching into her throat. Jean stood in the doorway, still dressed despite the hour, his dark eyes sharp and alert. He looked at her, then at the screens behind her, and his expression didn't change. But something flickered in his gaze, recognition, maybe even expectation. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice low and even. "I couldn't," Myra replied, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured to the monitors. "I found something." Jean moved into the room with that same predatory grace she'd noticed the first night, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He didn't sit. He stood beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive. "Show me," he said. Myra walked him through it, piece by piece. Chen's absence from his post. The phone calls. The financial transfers. Sung Park Shell Company. Her voice remained steady, clinical, but her pulse hammered against her ribs. When she finished, the silence in the room was suffocating. Jin's jaw tightened, the muscle near his temple flickering once, twice. His hands, usually so controlled, curled into fists at his sides. "My brother," he said quietly, the words barely above a whisper. Not a question. A statement. Myra nodded, her throat dry. The evidence points to him. Or, at least to someone he controls. Jean turned away from her, walking to the window that overlooked the compound's grounds. Security lights cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, illuminating the armed men who patrolled the perimeter. His empire. His family. His blood. "He's been pushing for control for years," Jean said, his voice distant, like he was speaking to the glass rather than to her. "I thought it was ambition. Impatience. I didn't think he'd—" He stopped, his shoulders tense beneath the tailored lines of his suit. Myra stood slowly, uncertain whether to approach or stay silent. "What are you going to do?" Jean didn't answer right away. When he finally turned back to face her, his expression had shifted into something cold, calculated, dangerous. The man who'd shown her flashes of humanity over the past days was gone, replaced by the mafia boss who'd built an empire on fear and precision. "I'm going to give him exactly what he wants," Jean said, his voice like steel. "An opportunity to take everything." Myra's eyes widened. "You're going to set a trap." Jin's smile was sharp, humorless. "I'm going to let him think he's won. And then I'm going to watch him destroy himself." He crossed the room, stopping directly in front of her, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You just exposed a traitor in my family, Myra. Do you understand what that means?" She swallowed hard. "That I'm either incredibly useful or incredibly expendable." "It means," Jean said softly, "that you're the only person in this compound I can trust completely." The weight of those words settled over her like a shroud. Jean reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek in a gesture so unexpected, so gentle, that Myra froze. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, "for seeing what I couldn't." Then he stepped back, the moment breaking, his expression hardening once more. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we end this." Myra watched him leave, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty office. She looked back at the monitors, at the evidence of betrayal glowing on the screens, and realized with startling clarity that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was a player in a game where the stakes were life and death. And Jean Sung Park had just made her his queen. The warehouse smelled like rust and old cargo, decades of salt air eating through metal bones. Myra's breath came shallow in the darkness, her hand tight around the phone Jean had given her, the one loaded with evidence that would end his brother's ambitions and possibly his life. "He'll come," Jean said quietly beside her, his voice carrying that same cold certainty it always did. Sung can't resist the chance to clean up his mess personally. They'd chosen this place deliberately. Abandoned shipping facility on the edge of the harbor, far from the park compound's security cameras and loyal ears. Neutral ground. Or, at least, ground where blood could be spilled without witnesses. Myra's pulse hammered against her throat. 6 weeks ago, she'd been serving champagne. Now she was bait in a trap designed to catch a man who'd already tried to kill her twice. "What if he brings an army?" she asked. Jin's jaw tightened, barely visible in the dim light filtering through broken windows. "He won't. He thinks he's smarter than me. Always has." The sound of a car engine cut through the silence. Headlights swept across rusted containers, then died. A door opened and closed with precise care. Sung Park walked into the warehouse alone, hands visible, expensive coat pristine despite the industrial decay surrounding them. He looked like Jin, same sharp features, same controlled power. But where Jin's eyes held ice, Sung's held fire barely banked. "Little brother," Sung said, his voice carrying across the empty space. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic." Jin stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight, and Myra stayed in shadow like they'd planned. "You tried to have me killed. I tried to save our family from your weakness." Sung stopped 20 feet away, his expression almost sad. "You've let sentiment compromise everything father built." This outsider, his eyes found Myra in the darkness. "She's made you soft. She's made me see clearly." Jin's voice didn't rise, but something deadly entered it. "You coordinated with the Zhao faction. Gave them my schedule, my security rotations. Your own brother." Sung laughed, sharp and bitter. "My brother died when he started talking about legitimacy, about going clean. The Park family doesn't survive by playing nice with politicians and prosecutors. We survive by being feared. We survive by being smart," Jin countered. "Something you forgot when you left a paper trail." Myra's hand tightened on the phone. The recordings, the financial transfers, the encrypted messages Jin's tech team had traced back to Sung's personal accounts, all of it pointed to a man willing to burn his family for power. Sung's face hardened. "You have no proof that would hold up anywhere that matters. The elders will never believe you over me. They'll believe her." Jin gestured toward Myra. "The woman who saved my life. The one with no agenda, no stake in our family politics. The one who found your mole in security because she actually paid attention." Something flickered in Sung's eyes. Respect, maybe, or hatred. Hard to tell. "She's a server who got lucky. Nothing more." "She's smarter than both of us," Jin said flatly. "And she has the proof loaded on a device that goes live in." He glanced at his watch. 45 minutes. "Unless you leave now. Disappear. Take what money you've hidden and never come back." The silence stretched between them, thick with decades of brotherhood and fresh betrayal. Sung's shoulders dropped slightly, his hand moving toward his inner pocket. "You'd really let me walk away?" "I'd really prefer not to kill my own blood," Jin replied. But Myra saw it, the shift in Sung's stance, the calculation in his eyes. She opened her mouth to shout a warning, just as the warehouse's side door exploded inward. Men poured through, 6, 8, 10 weapons raised, faces she didn't recognize. Not Park family. The Zhao faction. Sung's expression transformed from resignation to cold satisfaction. "Did you really think I'd come alone, little brother? That I'd trust your mercy?" Jin moved instantly, shoving Myra behind a shipping container as gunfire erupted. The sound was deafening, bullets sparking off metal, concrete dust exploding from the walls. "The back exit," Jin shouted, returning fire with a weapon she hadn't even seen him draw. "Go!" But Myra's mind was racing faster than her feet could move. The warehouse layout, she'd memorized it from the blueprints Jin showed her. The old loading mechanisms overhead. The control panel she'd spotted near the eastern wall. She wasn't running. Not anymore. "Jin!" she screamed over the chaos. "The containers." "Tip the containers." For half a heartbeat, his eyes met hers. Then understanding flashed across his face, sharp and immediate. He trusted her. And that trust was about to save both their lives, or end them. The first gunshot shattered the warehouse silence before Sung Park finished his confession. Myra's body moved on instinct, pulling Jin behind a concrete pillar as bullets tore through the air where they'd been standing. The rival faction had been waiting, Sung's insurance policy, his backup plan if the confrontation went wrong. How many? Jin's voice was steel, his hand already drawing his weapon. Myra's mind raced, counting muzzle flashes in the darkness.
8.
Maybe 10. They're flanking from the east entrance. Jin's men returned fire, but they were outnumbered, outpositioned. Sung had disappeared into the shadows, leaving them exposed. The circuit breaker, Myra said suddenly, her eyes finding the industrial panel on the far wall. Kill the lights. They don't know this building like we do. Jin stared at her for half a heartbeat, then nodded. Cover me. But Myra was already moving low and fast, using the machinery as cover. Bullets sparked off metal inches from her head. Her hands found the panel, yanked it open, and slammed the main breaker down. Darkness swallowed the warehouse whole. The gunfire became sporadic, confused. Jin's voice cut through the chaos in rapid Korean, directing his men with the precision of someone who'd fought in worse circumstances. Myra pressed herself against cold concrete, her breath coming in controlled measures despite her hammering heart. She heard movement to her left, footsteps too heavy, too careless. One of the rival faction, disoriented by the darkness. Her hand closed around a length of pipe.
She didn't think. She swung.
The impact vibrated up her arms. The man went down hard. Myra, Jin's voice, sharp with something that might have been fear. I'm fine, she called back, already moving again. North corner. 2 more coming through. The firefight lasted minutes that stretched like hours. Myra guided Jin's men through the darkness using sound and memory, turning her captivity in this compound into unexpected advantage. She knew every corner, every exit, every structural weakness of the buildings she'd been trapped in for weeks. When the emergency lights finally flickered on, 6 of the rival faction lay dead or incapacitated. The rest had fled. And Sung Park stood in the center of the warehouse, his weapon aimed directly at Jin's chest. You've always been weak, Sung said, his voice shaking with rage and something darker, desperation. Father knew it. I knew it. You were supposed to die that night at the gala. This whole mess, he gestured toward Myra with disgust. It's proof you're not fit to lead. Jin stepped forward, deliberate, fearless. You killed our father's trust. You killed our honor. For what? Power you were always too small to hold. I would have been strong enough. Sung's finger tightened on the trigger. Myra saw it happening in slow motion, the muscle tension, the shift in stance. She moved without thinking, throwing herself forward. But Jin was faster. His shot rang out clean and precise, striking Sung's shoulder. The weapon clattered across concrete as Sung collapsed, clutching the wound, his face twisted with shock and pain. Jin stood over his brother, his weapon steady, his expression carved from stone. For a long moment, nobody moved. The warehouse held its breath. You're right about one thing, Jin said quietly. I'm not the man our father was. I'm not the man you wanted me to be. He lowered his weapon. Which is why you're going to live. You're going to leave this country, leave this organization, and you're going to disappear. If I ever see you again, if you ever threaten what I'm building, I will finish this. Sung stared up at him, blood seeping through his fingers, disbelief written across his face. You're letting me go? I'm breaking the cycle, Jin said. He turned to his lieutenant. Get him medical attention. Then put him on the first flight to anywhere that isn't here. As his men dragged Sung away, Jin finally turned to Myra. She stood among the wreckage and shadows, her clothes torn, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, but her eyes clear and steady. You saved me again, he said. We saved each other, she corrected. That's what partners do. Jin closed the distance between them, his hand finding hers, warm despite everything. I'm done pretending this empire is worth more than what we could build together. No more violence for violence's sake. No more blood debt. We legitimize. We rebuild. We do it right. That's a dangerous promise, Myra said, but she was smiling. The old guard won't like it. Let them try to stop us. His thumb traced across her knuckles, gentle despite the calluses. You pulled me back from death once. You've been pulling me back every day since. Myra looked at him, this dangerous, powerful man who'd kept her prisoner and somehow become her choice. So what now?
Now.
Jin's expression softened into something she'd never seen before. Hope. Now we walk out of here together. Not as captor and captive. Not as boss and asset. As partners, Myra finished. He kissed her then, soft and certain, tasting like smoke and survival and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, dawn was breaking through the warehouse windows, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Hand in hand, they walked toward the light, leaving the old world and its ghosts behind them, ready to build something better from the ashes. The first gunshot shattered the warehouse silence before Sung Park finished his confession. Myra's body moved on instinct, pulling Jin behind a concrete pillar as bullets tore through the air where they'd been standing. The rival faction had been waiting, Sung's insurance policy, his backup plan if the confrontation went wrong. How many? Jin's voice was steel, his hand already drawing his weapon. Myra's mind raced, counting muzzle flashes in the darkness.
8.
Maybe 10. They're flanking from the east entrance. Jin's men returned fire, but they were outnumbered, outpositioned. Sung had disappeared into the shadows, leaving them exposed. The circuit breaker, Myra said suddenly, her eyes finding the industrial panel on the far wall. Kill the lights. They don't know this building like we do. Jin stared at her for half a heartbeat, then nodded. Cover me. But Myra was already moving low and fast, using the machinery as cover. Bullets sparked off metal inches from her head. Her hands found the panel, yanked it open, and slammed the main breaker down. Darkness swallowed the warehouse whole. The gunfire became sporadic, confused. Jin's voice cut through the chaos in rapid Korean, directing his men with the precision of someone who'd fought in worse circumstances. Myra pressed herself against cold concrete, her breath coming in controlled measures despite her hammering heart. She heard movement to her left, footsteps too heavy, too careless. One of the rival faction, disoriented by the darkness. Her hand closed around a length of pipe. She didn't think.
She swung.
The impact vibrated up her arms. The man went down hard. Myra, Jin's voice, sharp with something that might have been fear. I'm fine, she called back, already moving again. North corner. 2 more coming through. The firefight lasted minutes that stretched like hours. Myra guided Jin's men through the darkness using sound and memory, turning her captivity in this compound into unexpected advantage. She knew every corner, every exit, every structural weakness of the buildings she'd been trapped in for weeks. When the emergency lights finally flickered on, 6 of the rival faction lay dead or incapacitated. The rest had fled. And Sung Park stood in the center of the warehouse, his weapon aimed directly at Jin's chest. You've always been weak, Sung said, his voice shaking with rage and something darker, desperation. Father knew it. I knew it. You were supposed to die that night at the gala. This whole mess, he gestured toward Myra with disgust. It's proof you're not fit to lead. Jin stepped forward, deliberate, fearless. You killed our father's trust. You killed our honor. For what? Power you were always too small to hold. I would have been strong enough. Sung's finger tightened on the trigger. Myra saw it happening in slow motion, the muscle tension, the shift in stance. She moved without thinking, throwing herself forward. But Jean was faster. His shot rang out clean and precise, striking Sung's shoulder. The weapon clattered across concrete as Sung collapsed, clutching the wound, his face twisted with shock and pain. Jean stood over his brother, his weapon steady, his expression carved from stone. For a long moment nobody moved. The warehouse held its breath. "You're right about one thing," Jean said quietly. "I'm not the man our father was. I'm not the man you wanted me to be." He lowered his weapon. "Which is why you're going to live. You're going to leave this country, leave this organization, and you're going to disappear. If I ever see you again, if you ever threaten what I'm building, I will finish this." Sung stared up at him, blood seeping through his fingers, disbelief written across his face. "You're letting me go?" "I'm breaking the cycle," Jean said. He turned to his lieutenant. "Get him medical attention. Then put him on the first flight to anywhere that isn't here." As his men dragged Sung away, Jean finally turned to Myra. She stood among the wreckage and shadows, her clothes torn, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, but her eyes clear and steady. "You saved me again," he said. "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's what partners do." Jean closed the distance between them, his hand finding hers, warm despite everything. "I'm done pretending this empire is worth more than what we could build together. No more violence for violence's sake. No more blood debt. We legitimize. We rebuild. We do it right." "That's a dangerous promise," Myra said, but she was smiling. "The old guard won't like it. Let them try to stop us." His thumb traced across her knuckles, gentle despite the calluses. "You pulled me back from death once. You've been pulling me back every day since." Myra looked at him, this dangerous, powerful man who'd kept her prisoner and somehow become her choice. "So what now?"
Now.
Jin's expression softened into something she'd never seen before. Hope. "Now we walk out of here together. Not as captor and captive. Not as boss and asset. As partners," Myra finished. He kissed her then, soft and certain, tasting like smoke and survival and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, dawn was breaking through the warehouse windows, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Hand in hand, they walked toward the light, leaving the old world and its ghosts behind them, ready to build something better from the ashes. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is save someone's life. Because when you pull someone back from death, you don't just change their story. You rewrite your own. Myra Scott learned that the moment her hands touched Jean Sung Park's wound, she thought she was just doing what any decent person would do. She didn't know she was stepping into a world where compassion is currency, where loyalty is survival, and where love can bloom even in the darkest soil. From invisible server to indispensable partner. From captive to chosen. From surviving to truly living. This is what happens when an ordinary woman refuses to let her circumstances define her limits. When quick thinking becomes power. When the instinct to heal transforms into the courage to change an entire empire. Myra didn't just save Jin's life that night in the ballroom. She saved him from becoming the monster everyone expected him to be. And in return, he gave her something she'd been searching for her whole life, a place where she wasn't just seen, but valued. Not despite who she was, but because of it. Have you ever made a split-second decision that changed everything? A moment where you chose compassion over safety, courage over comfort? Maybe you helped someone when everyone else looked away. Maybe you stood up when staying silent would have been easier. Maybe you saved something or someone without realizing you were saving yourself too. If this story resonated with you, if you felt Myra's fear and Jin's transformation, If you believe that even the most broken people can choose a different path, let me know in the comments. Tell me about your moment, the time you chose to act when you could have walked away. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories where strong women rewrite the rules, where dangerous men learn what it means to truly protect someone, where love isn't about possession but partnership, hit that like button and subscribe. Because Myra and Jin's story is just beginning, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be invisible. Sometimes survival isn't about hiding. Sometimes it's about standing in the light and daring the world to look away. Welcome to Myra's Empire. Welcome to a new kind of power. And remember, the person who saves your life might just be the one who changes it forever.